Hey, welcome. This is the way I made my Mandalorian helmet with a Beskar finish. First stage is naturally 3D printing. I have a large enough printer that allows me to print the main bucket in one shot, and then the side pieces are printed separately. Once the helmet is done, the supports need to be removed. I use a large flathead screwdriver with a rubber mallet to knock out the supports. Need to be quite careful as I have cracked helmets this way before, so ensure the flathead is only ever touching the supports and not the main print. Any cleanup is done using some wire cutters. Now onto the most time-consuming stage, the post-processing of the helmet. As you can see, the helmet has layer lines despite being very well printed. Since it must have a near mirror finish later, all of these layer lines need to be sanded down. I sand using a power sander, but you can do it all by hand. It will just take a lot longer. Starting off with a low grit 60 or 80 sandpaper, and then gradually switching up to the higher grades without going any higher than 240 at this stage. Wearing appropriate fine dust respirator and eye protection is a must. It's best to sand outside or in a well ventilated environment too, or you can wet sand, which will keep the dust particles down. I recommend having the helmet printed in any color other than white, because that will ensure that as it's being sanded, a visible color change occurs. The helmet is mostly flat, so this makes the sanding relatively straightforward. The trickiest parts are the eyes, the circular brow, and the band going around the top of the helmet. I won't sand the band too hard since I want to maintain the grooves. I shall cover those layer lines with a filler shortly. The bottom of the helmet also needs to be sanded. To make the underside of the eyes and the brow flat, it's a good idea to take the file and go over the areas with it. They're particularly challenging areas because of how the 3D printed layers are stacked. Filler stage comes next. I use wood filler since it's easiest to work with. Automotive body fillers can be used too, but be mindful of the toxicity. Read the back label. I sometimes use both. If you're in America, Bondo Spot Putty is meant to be amazing. I don't like applying the filler everywhere, so I mostly just cover the top, the band, the eye section, and the bottom of the helmet. If I see any other imperfections, those are covered too. I use a toothpick or a sharp tool to get the filler out of the ridges and any other areas I can't reach with my fingers. Let the filler dry for the recommended time, plus some. Now back to sanding. All the excess filler needs to be sanded down. I use 180 to 240 grit paper at this stage. I don't go any higher because I find that the papers clog up too fast. Manual sanding is required for area around the top band, brow and eyes. A good tell that you sanded sufficiently is if you can't feel the layer lines if you run over the print with your nail and it just feels smooth. While filler primer will help hide some of the minor imperfections, most of the work has to be done now, since anything that isn't perfectly smooth will show up in our final finish because we will be using a gloss black paint. Metallics and dark gloss paints reveal the quality of the prep work the most. If you're using non-metallic or lighter colors, they'll be more lenient, but that's not really applicable for this helmet. I'm not done with sanding just yet, but filler primer is the next stage. It's a thick primer that will help with a smooth finish. Firstly though, ensure that the surface is clean from any debris or oils. Wipe with some alcohol if you are using your bare hands while sanding. I prefer to use gloves for this exact reason. I'll be using spray cans for everything, so you could easily replicate this. Make sure to spray outside or in a well-ventilated environment and use a VOC safe respirator. Just like with any spray cans, always read the label on the back for the application process, since while most have the same principles, the manufacturer will have the best suggestions. Cans must be shook well. I like to test out the spray power and the thickness on the cover of my spray booth or a small test piece. Start spraying away from the helmet, go over the helmet, and then finish away from the helmet. Practice makes perfect because initially it may feel quite unnatural, and you may end up spraying too thick or too thin. If you spray too thick, the paint will run. At this stage, it's not too much of a concern because more sanding is coming anyway. A thin coat of filler is applied all over, then I wait for 5 minutes for it to flash and apply 2 more. The same process is done to the side pieces. When spraying the coat several times and thinly, the filler primer, and any paint for that matter, will be able to dry properly and avoid any orange peel, once again aiding in that perfectly smooth finish. After the first few coats of the filler primer, I let it dry fully and then sand it gently with 240 or 320 grit paper, making sure not to press hard as the goal is just to smooth out the sprayed on filler primer, not to sand it down to zero. After the initial coat of filler primer, I found that there were still some large imperfections, so I went back to apply some more filler to the areas around the brow and the mohawk. I then wet sanded a small section of the front, following with a quick respray using the same techniques as before and giving the helmet another gentle sand with a 320 grit paper. Now is a good time to attach those side pieces. I use 30-minute epoxy to do the job. Scuff up the surface of the helmet and the back of the side pieces for some better adhesion too. The side pieces are held in place with some clamps to prevent them from coming off. Spread the epoxy out evenly. Be fairly generous as you don't want the side pieces to come off with a knock, but avoid runs as they're difficult to clean. As they're attached, there will most likely be some small visible lines or holes, so fill those in with the same filler that we used earlier. Clean up with a toothpick, then sand away when dry. Next, repeat the filler primer process and let it fully dry. Time for wet sanding. The idea is the same as regular sanding, just using water to achieve an even smoother finish. As I mentioned earlier, another benefit of this is that it keeps the dust down so a mask isn't necessary. I use a 400, 600 or 800 grit paper. Ideally you want to use wet sandpaper, but I'm just using regular one. I am not applying much pressure and using circular motion. Washing the helmet is a good idea and makes the process cleaner. The helmet looks quite tidy indeed. Now is the best stage to make the visor. To make it, I take a sheet of A4 paper, press it against the helmet and sketch out the outline of the visor. See how it fits inside, make any adjustments where necessary and recut it. Several attempts will be required. For the visor, I'm using a 3mm tinted acrylic sheet that I ordered pre-cut to an A4 size. Draw the visor outline on there without removing the protective layers. Now I cut it out following the outline. The visor needs to be shaped in place, so I preheat my oven to 150 degrees Celsius, place the sheet of baking paper on the tray so the acrylic doesn't stick. Throw it inside for 7 minutes, take it out, and shape in place while using gloves to avoid fingerprints embedding themselves into the visor. Prior to painting, prime with a regular primer for best color accuracy. The painting stage is finally up. The inside of the helmet is quite ugly right now, so I spray some matte black paint inside. For the outside, I'm using gloss black paint for my base coat. The painting process is the same as the filler primer. Start away from the print, go over it, and finish away. Use thin layers because now you do not want to have a run. Sanding those runs down is quite annoying. If you think the paint still has some imperfections after it's dry, it will be a good idea to go over it with some sandpaper just briefly before applying the clear coat. Sand with a high grit until you get that matte look. The next stage is clear coating the helmet. I'm using this 2K gloss clear. To activate this clear coat, the lacquer and the activator must be mixed by pressing the button at the bottom. Shake it well for the hardener to mix properly. The clear coat is optional, since the graphite powder can be applied directly to the black paint, but I found that it rubs off quicker and is also more prone to grease prints. If you are using the clear coat method though, 2K will be essential for the graphite powder to work, since it dries faster, harder, but is also more expensive than regular 1K and has very limited usable time after the components inside are mixed. The helmet is now carefully sprayed with a clear coat. Several thin coats. Again, the instructions will be written on the can, or you can Google the name of the spray paint or clear coat followed by TDS or instructions. Do read them. Now I'll wait for about 30 minutes to an hour for the clear coat to become touch dry. That Beskar shine is achieved using the graphite powder that I picked up from Amazon. I use a cotton pad to spread it over, but I've heard of makeup sponges yielding some great results too. Dab the cotton pad inside of the powder, then spread the powder over the helmet, being very careful not to press into the helmet since I don't want any marks left on it. The entire helmet must be covered. I apply several coats to ensure everything is covered appropriately. Then, with a clean pad, I start to clean up and rubbing it in a little bit more. Again, keeping in mind that the clear coat is very soft. Now that it's all rubbed in, I'll wait for the clear coat to fully dry. The surface has to be very clean, so I make sure not to touch it with my hands and clean the helmet with some compressed air just in case there's any debris. Final coat of the same 2K gloss is applied. Clear coats are very prone to running, so they must not be oversprayed. There's a very thin line between having a perfect coverage and having a run. So if you get a chance, experiment with some clear coats before applying it to the helmet, since each clear coat behaves differently. Now when the helmet is fully dry, secure the visor inside using a sticky velcro. Some tactical padding can be added inside for extra comfort to wear, but I'll be using mine as a display piece, so did not bother. As you can see, the visor is very much see-through. And finally, a Mando helmet with some Beskar shine. The main benefit of using a clear coat instead of just having the graphite powder straight on black is the fact that you don't leave any fingerprints behind, and even if you can see them, can easily wipe them away. Meanwhile, when graphite powder is exposed, the fingerprints are just all over. Weathering is also now an option and would make it more screen accurate, so maybe something I will explore later. For now, I like it clean. It's definitely a long and tedious process, but in my opinion is worth it. There's many ways out there of making a Mando helmet, this is just the one that I like. So maybe this video will help you make yours, or share in the comment section how you do it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this if you found it interesting. Thank you for watching, see you in the next one.